So why don't you just tell us a little bit about, why you did this?
Why I did this. So my producer, Gil Friesen, was a great guy, music industry veteran. He used to run A&M Records. They called him the ampersand in A&M. And when I met him, he told me this story. He said, last year I went to a Leonard Cohen concert, and I smoked a joint, and I spent the entire concert fixated on the 3 backup singers on stage. And I kept wondering, what's their story? And the next morning I woke up and the idea was still in my head. And I've been asking my friends in the industry, and everybody thinks, sure, Gil, it's fine, there is no story. And he just wouldn't let go of the idea. And he came to me and he said, I think there's something interesting about backup singers. I said, I've made a number of music documentaries, and I said, that's interesting, because I don't know anything about backup singers. I said, what do you think is interesting? What do you think the story is? And he said, well, that's your job. Because he knew nothing either. So, I went home, I put backup singers into Google, and nothing came up. I mean, no books, no documentaries. I could barely find an article or two. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe nothing had really been done about it. And so the only thing I could do was meet backup singers. So I said to him, let me go out and research it. And so I went out and spent 3 months doing oral histories with backup singers. I did 50 to start with. Ultimately, I probably did about 80. But that was the process. And there was no story. It was just about figuring out who these women were and even what the story would be. It could have gone in so many different directions. We could have talked about Nashville or talked about girl groups and so many different directions. And I after I'd done all these interviews and I sat back and I looked at it, I said, well, the story to me that emerges is really the first story of backup singing, which is the one we told here. And
was that story specifically about African American women? If you'd been in country music, would they be African American as well?
Some. Nashville, some of the best backup singers, the studio singers are African American, but it's very mixed, more mixed there.
Wow.
But even if you listen to all the Al Green records, all the High records, all those vocals, all white women.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Which is interesting. And I've been telling people this, that I feel like this is very much the first word on backup singing, not the last word.
Right.
I was just trying to open up this for discussion, because there's so much. I met so many other incredible singers that I couldn't put into this film because they didn't fit. There was one, for instance.
And you focused on women.
Yeah.
Because there's male backup singers.
There are.
Presumably.
And I interviewed, a couple in the film, and, it's predominantly a female business, but not exclusively. And I kind of came up with very strict rules about what kind of singers I was going to focus on, just to help me focus what the whole story was going to be. And, there are people like the Adantes, who were the house backup singers of Motown, who were great singers, but to me, they didn't qualify for what my strict definition was, because I was looking at the session singers in New York and LA who were the first call singers who could walk into any session and do anything. So they would sing with Buck Owens in the morning, and then Frank Sinatra, and then Frank Zappa, on the same day. And they could do it. They were working without a net, and they were that good. Like the Adantes were great, but they got a paycheck every week, and they had the same producers and the same musicians and the same genre, which is great stuff, but it's just slightly different, and that was maybe an arbitrary definition, but at least helped me focus the story down to what we ended up with.
What did you think of that incredible thing that Tata said about how if she had been successful, she wouldn't be sitting here in front of you, she'd be OD'd somewhere. What did you think about a remark like that?
She told me a lot more. It goes a lot deeper. And at one point, the film went more into it, but it kind of stopped the film cold, just because it becomes about Tata's adventure and her troubles. She really became an addict and was homeless for a time. And backup singing saved her life. I mean, it's something I heard from a number of these people. I mean, she ended up finding her way back into the industry through Andre Crouch, the famous gospel singer. And she ended up sleeping on his couch for a year and a half. And Andre was the guy that when Quincy Jones or Michael Jackson needed a singer, they'd say, Andre, who do you have? And he said, well, Tata Vega. And her big break coming into the industry as a backup singer was that Steven Spielberg was looking for a voice for Suge Avery in The Color Purple. And he asked Quincy Jones, send me some voices. And Quincy sent him 5 voices. And he heard Tata's voice and said, that's our Suge. And then he met her and realized she was Puerto Rican, not black, as Tata said. But that was the greatest compliment she could have gotten, the fact that Quincy thought that much of her and her voice to put her in that league. And now, you know, whenever I've seen a clip from The Color Purple, all I can picture is Tata. Her voice is so distinctive that you can't imagine anybody else doing it.
Well, there is something, you know, that especially since, you know, we live in this celebrity culture and one begins to wonder if it'll ever go away.
Yeah.
And especially now that everybody can be a star, you know, in their own world and maybe more, and with reality TV and all of that. There is something about this film, to me, that's very interesting in that it does show, on the one hand, dreams that didn't come true, but on the other hand, without it being sappy, it really does show a real dignity to the music, the real music that's going on with those backup singers. And it leads me to think, you know, why isn't that enough? Why do you have to make that walk, that extra walk to stardom?
And that's the thing, that we all define ourselves often, and we judge ourselves based on what people and society tells us we should judge ourselves based on. And that's why, to me, Lisa Fischer really represents the soul of the movie, because she's somebody who was a star. She put out a record, she won a Grammy, she was beautiful, everybody wanted to work with her. And she looked around and said, if what I really care about is just singing, I've seen being a star up close for too many years, and I know that's not what I want. I just want to sing. And she made that decision, which is a decision that 99 out of 100 people would not make, but it was absolutely the right decision for her, and she's been so much happier because of it. And I think that, I mean, my breakthrough in making the film was realizing, I mean, I remember early on, after doing several dozen interviews, thinking this is going to be the most depressing documentary, because they're so obviously talented that you just think what a tragedy it is that they're not better known. But they themselves were not bitter and upset. And that's what I started to just realize, that to them, and really the whole end of the film, is it's not about not making it. It's about coming to terms with the life you actually live rather than the life you dreamt of having or the people told you should live, which is something that I think we all have to deal with at a certain point.
Right, right. But I would imagine some of them are going to get work based on the film.
And they've gotten...
I mean, Lisa is probably getting phone calls, right?
They've all gotten... It's changed all their lives.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So Lisa is now cutting her second record, 23 years after her first record. And she's doing it on, I mean, she was still with the Stones up until 2 weeks ago, and somebody said they just saw her singing behind Pink last week on TV. Like,
wow.
She still does stuff.
Wow.
I mean, that's her bread and butter, but she's doing an album that's, I've heard some tracks, it's very kind of jazz influenced. She's playing at the Monterey Jazz Festival in August. She's getting a ton of calls. All of them are. Darlene, I saw her on Monday, she's never been busier. And I'm actually working with Oprah Winfrey, producing a TV movie based on Darlene's life that Toni Braxton's starring in, that we start shooting in September. So that's a whole other thing, which is great. I mean, that was Darlene's, she told me when I met her that she always wanted to have a movie made of her story.
No lack of ego there.
No. But, and the thing is, the amount of her story I get to tell in this film is only, you know, a Cliff Notes version of it. Her story is so much deeper, you know, it goes in so many different directions. I mean, that's the hard part about doing something like this, is you're cutting stuff out that is just fantastic, cutting people out.
I have one last question for you, because I know the audience would like to talk with you. Do you remember, this film made me think about an album where the backup singers did become famous, and it seemed to be effortless, or maybe they were famous already. And it was an album that Laura Nero made called Gonna Take a Miracle with LaBelle, and it was
Yeah.
Patti LaBelle
Yeah.
and Nona Hendrix, and then another woman I never heard of. But they seemed to just move right into a spot. Nona Hendrix didn't become obviously as famous as Patti LaBelle, but
And Patti, I mean, when people have asked me sometimes, what's the difference between a lead singer and a backup singer, I'll say a hit. Because sometimes,
yeah.
If Mary Clayton had had a big hit on one of those records, she'd be Patti LaBelle.
right.
I mean, they're the same people. Patti
just
LaBelle and Nona, they grew up in churches. The exact same training, the exact same background. Same Anita Baker, all those singers, the ones who made it and the ones who didn't. They're Aretha. They're all cut from the exact same cloth.
But do you believe that there could, as the film says at one point,
Yeah.
or somebody says, there could only be, if Aretha and
Yeah.
Diana Ross are there, there's no room for anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I think to really be an Aretha or a Diana Ross, it is more than about just talent. I mean, it's about, really, talent's like number 4 on the list. It's timing, luck, and ambition. It's really the Madonna gene. Willing to, if you're willing to crawl over broken glass to be famous, that's something to be a pop star, really, that you have to have. So, but to be somebody like a Patti LaBelle, these singers are just as good. Mary's just every much the singer that Patti LaBelle is, and I think some of those singers, they could have been, they could have been better known. But for that, but it's certainly, they were not all meant to be lead singers. And I think that is, I mean, part of it is.
What do you, from your assessment, what?
Part of it is.
Because a lot of, there's a lot of discourse from the stars about
Sure.
ego and.
I mean, I think a big part of it is that they all grew up in church. And I think the church not only informed their technical ability and their harmony ability, but the psychology of a backup singer comes from the church. Losing your individual identity, serving a power greater than yourself, being a member of the choir, supporting the pastor, supporting the singer. I think that's the reason so many singers in the backup world come from the church, because they have that psychology from the church. And I think that's a huge part of it. And backup singers generally end up in the industry because they're good and they fall into it. Nobody generally starts out saying, I want to be a backup singer. So by the time later in life, when somebody says, you're a great person, you're a great singer, I want to put out a record on you, and they have to flex that ambition muscle, they've never used it before. They've never had to, because they're so naturally talented. And in a way, then being less talented might make you more ambitious. But being that talented, often you don't develop that ambition muscle that you need.
Because there's so much that comes to you actually easily.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, in a context.
So there was one other thing I was going to say, just because I've been sitting here listening to people talk for 2 days about ideas. And so one idea, one very simple, short idea that informed the making of the film, and it really informs everything I do, and it actually informs backup singers and what they do, is this: listen. It's the thing I do. And I know you know all about this, but being in the film world, and particularly in the arts and really in the entertainment industry, so much of it is about your voice and what do you have to say, which is great. I respect that. But it's hard to listen to other people if all you're trying to do is listen to yourself. If you're talking, you can't hear. And listening builds understanding, it builds empathy. And this film is a prime example. Like I said, I didn't know anything about this world. I didn't know what the story was. What I did is sit down and listen and listen and listen for months, and then sit back and say, okay, what's this telling me? And to me, I was trained as a journalist. And so I think that's actually much better training as a documentary filmmaker than being somebody coming out of film school where they train you to write a script and then make a movie about it.
And have your voice.
Yeah, I mean, when you make a documentary, you shoot a movie and then you write a script. It's a backwards process. It's a journalistic process. And so I always encourage people to just listen.
Who wants to talk?
So what, if anything, distinguishes the dichotomy between a backing singer and a lead singer versus, a member of an orchestra versus a solo violinist an actor in an ensemble versus the star? I mean, are these
Yeah.
all the same, or do you think there's something about singing that somehow is different?
It is the same in many, many ways, and I think that's something that's been very relatable about this film. You know, I've had actors, I've had production designers, I've had all, I mean, really, there was a moment I had at a screening in Minneapolis early on where we screened the film, maybe it was like our fourth or fifth screening, and a guy stood up in the crowd and said, I'm a software engineer, I'm a middle manager, I work with a team of people, I'm proud of what I do, but I don't get all the credit in the world and I don't get all the money in the world, but I'm okay with that. And I realized I'm a backup singer and we're all backup singers. And I was like, I was like, that's it, that's it. What I find unique about these singers, well, one is, and we talk about it a bit, is the voice, in a way, is such a naked, emotional expression of yourself that you aren't hiding or mitigating that expression through an instrument or a device or a team or whatever else. There's a real kind of nakedness of it, of the expression. And also their proximity to such extreme success and fame. I mean, literally, you know, at the edge of the frame, you know, they're there. And that, I think, makes it just that much more, you know, egregious, you know, that you see that they're there better than, you know, people say, are they as good as lead singers? They're always better than lead singers, always, always, always. Because lead singers can screw up all day long, you know, but a backup singer has to be perfect on the first take and the 50th take, and if you're not, you don't get called to the next session. So their facility is just unbelievable. And, you know, so that's the
But
quick
you know,
answer.
there's something early in the film where somebody distinguishes between a singer and an entertainer.
Yeah.
And clearly a lead singer has to be an entertainer.
Well, I mean, one of the stories I loved, Darlene told me that Darlene's an incredible singer, and she sang behind so many singers who she was better than. And she said she did a tour in the 70s with Sonny Bono. And, you know, Sonny had started as like the gopher for Phil Spector. And so she'd known him forever, and she said, I loved Sonny. We were great buddies, but, you know, in those Spector days, Phil would tell Sonny to get on the mic with everybody, and she'd tell Sonny, you know, the sooner you get out of here, the sooner we can actually finish this, because you can't sing a lick. So later on, she did a tour with him, and, you know, I said, well, how do you feel singing behind somebody who you're so much better than? And she said, I loved it. And she said, because he needed me, and I was there to help lift him every night and help him do what he could do. And the thing that he showed me is, whatever you think of Sonny Bono, he had an ability to have people like him. You know, he was immensely likable. And she said that was a skill that she didn't necessarily feel that she had. And it's just a different skill set. And that's maybe the entertainer part of it. And I thought that was so interesting. But it's, you know, if you're a backup singer that sits in the back stewing over the fact that, you know, you got, you know, the raw end of the deal, or you're more talented than the person up there, you're not going to last. Your ego can't handle it, you know, and you'll wash out of the industry.
Anybody else want a question? Right there, yeah?
So, great movie, by the way.
Thanks.
So, on the subject of these individuals' proximity to really famous people, your analogy got me thinking. So, if you were the number 5 guy at Apple, you're very successful. You get a lot of reward. If you're the number 5 person in the Rolling Stones, or you know, you're interviewing Bruce Springsteen, a lot of very famous people, and I guess, you know, first of all, the whole time I was watching the movie, I'm going, you know, is it fair? Is it fair for these people? And I don't know. You started getting to the point. I just really wondered: I mean, they obviously make a deal. They're happy with it. How do they see it? I mean, do they see it as fair because they are adjacent to such incredible success? And I have no idea how they do. It looks like they at least struggle in certain respects. Artistically, do they struggle? Financially, do they struggle? How does that work out?
Yeah, I mean, it's for many of them, it's still a hand-to-mouth profession, you know, and only the best ones, some of whom are in the movie, have done pretty well. And if you're a Mary Clayton or Darlene Love and you've sung on a lot of big hits that get licensed for big movies, you're okay. You know, you have a retirement fund. But for the most part, there's such a misconception, and this is something I came up against many times, is that when you see somebody next to a Mick Jagger or Bruce Springsteen or Michael Jackson on stage, you instantly assume all these things about them and how glamorous their lives are, and they're not. You know, they live. It's the same as being a sax player or whatever else, and they have modest apartments or homes and live modest lives. And people just don't understand that. I mean, there was one weird thing that happened right after we finished the film. Judith Hill went on The Voice, the TV show The Voice, and she was better than everybody on the show, hands down. But at a certain point, there was a backlash going on. I know, because I was reading the chat rooms trying to figure out what was happening. And people said, well, she sang with Michael Jackson, she's a pro, what's she doing? There's an amateur competition, she shouldn't be doing this. The whole time I filmed with Judith, she was living in her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, trying to raise money so she could do a showcase with her band. You know, the dichotomy between what people thought her life was and how she had it made, and the reality of her life could not have been greater. And that's something that that hopefully the film shows and has people empathize with them in a different way and just a greater sense of understanding.
You had a question.
Hi. Thank you so much for making
Sure.
this film. So moved. Second time I've seen it. Please go and make all those other stories.
Yeah.
As a gift to the world.
I know. Well, I'll give you one story that did not make the film, because it's its own film, that Gloria Jones, who appears once or twice, she has like a pearl jacket, kind of and maybe a pillbox hat, or Gloria.
Looks like a fedora.
Yeah, that's it. And she's incredible. She was an LA church girl, South Central, found her way in the studios, same clan as all these guys. She ended up joining Joe Cocker. He took her to England. She had recorded the first version of Tainted Love in the 60s as a soul single.
Wow.
The original soul version. And, it sold like 10 copies. And moved to England, met Mark Bolan, fell in love with him, had a kid with him, joined T-Rex, and she was driving the car when he died, and she damaged her vocal cords and hasn't been able to sing since.
Oh.
And then, because she was never actually married to him, his whole family wrote her off, and her son Roland Bolan and her, live in LA half the year. The other half of the year, she lives in Sierra Leone, Africa, where she runs the Mark Bolan School of Music, teaching African kids American pop songs and harmony singing. It's the weirdest story. Like, that's a whole documentary right there. Yeah, I know.
Maybe we have time for one
Yeah.
last question. Anybody else? Yeah, maybe there, because...
That was an awesome film.
Thanks.
Back in the 90s, there was a very big hit record in the clubs by a group called Black Box. And I used to stare at the record cover because they had an incredibly beautiful woman on the record cover. And it turned out that the singer was actually, I think, Loretta Holloway. And,
Brenda Holloway?
I'm not sure if
Loretta,
I got that
yeah.
name right, because that was 20 years ago.
There's a Holloway family of backup singers.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe it is.
And she sued and finally got
Yeah.
credit. She wasn't even mentioned on the album.
Yeah.
And at the time, I thought that was an anomaly. And now, seeing your
Yeah,
film,
well-
I'm thinking maybe that's not such an anomaly.
I mean, originally I had a whole scene going even deeper into it, and I remember asking Mary Clayton about Milli Vanilli. Remember the famous group? And Mary laughed and said, honey, we were Milli Vanilli before Milli Vanilli was Milli Vanilli. We were all doing it. And I interviewed another singer that didn't make the film, Martha Wash, legendary gospel singer, who sang, she was in the Weather Girls and did It's Raining Men. And then she's the one who sang Everybody Dance Now. Everybody Dance
Wow,
Now.
boy.
Got paid like $150.
Oh,
Oh, that's it. Yeah, the video came out. Hot model lip syncing her voice, and she sued and won a big settlement. And that's very common. I mean, it still goes on today. I think they just pay people more to shut up about it. But a lot of the great, or not great, a lot of the popular singers we have today, in fact, when you hear their voice, their sound is a mixture of their voice and the same backup singer who they always work with, and they
Oh, it's
blend their two
terrible.
voices.
It's terrible.
So it goes on, and stories of backup singers hiding, behind curtains under the stage, singing along, all these things. It all goes on. And if you go see a show, one of these big shows that's more like Cirque du Soleil than a concert, but like a Britney Spears show, or they're not singing. They can't. They're doing gymnastics and flying through the air and whatever else they're doing. It's not live performance. It's theatricality with pre-recorded music.
It's entertainment.
It's entertainment.
So
Yeah.
entertainment is really
Yeah.
moved forward.
And and some of the singers just said those kinds of gigs are the worst, because you get paid to lip sync your own voice. I mean, what's more soul sucking than that? So,
Well, on that very happy
Yeah.
note,
Yes,
thank you
okay.
very much.
thank you.